The crash happened at 5:27 in the morning, not on a highway, not in rain, not in fog, not in any of the conditions that produce the kind of accidents that leave investigators uncertain about what happened. It happened on a straight, dry, empty street in a business park in Strongsville, Ohio, in the first light of a summer Sunday. A 2018 Toyota Camry turned onto that street, accelerated, and drove directly into the brick wall of a commercial building at nearly 100 miles per hour. There were no skid marks. The brake pedal was never touched. 2 people in that car were pronounced dead at the scene. Dominic Russo was 20 years old. Davian Flanagan was 19. The driver survived. She was 17 years old. Her name was Mackenzie Shirilla, and from the moment investigators began looking at what the evidence actually showed, the question was never whether something had gone wrong. The question was whether it was supposed to. Dominic Russo and Mackenzie Shirilla had been together for 4 years. They were living together at the time of the crash. Shirilla had graduated from Strongsville High School not long before. From the outside, it looked like a young couple building a life in a Cleveland suburb. Inside, it looked like something else entirely. Court documents described significant fighting in the months leading up to July 31st. Escalating arguments, repeated breakups, threats. Dominic's mother would later tell the court that in the 6 months before the crash, Shirilla had become increasingly possessive of her son, that the arguments were getting worse, that the dynamic between them had shifted into something she did not recognize, that she had been watching something deteriorate in real time and had not fully understood what it was building toward. 2 weeks before the crash, there was an incident that would become central to the prosecution's case. Shirilla was driving with Dominic when an argument broke out. According to prosecutors, she threatened to crash the car right then and there while he was in it. Dominic called his mother. He asked to be picked up. A friend went to get him. A friend who, on that phone call, overheard Shirilla say directly, "I will crash this car right now." Dominic got out of that car safely. 2 weeks later, he did not. In the month leading up to July 31st, Shirilla allegedly made multiple threats toward Russo. Videos recovered from his phone showed an altercation in which she was heard degrading him repeatedly, threatening him, and damaging his property. She threatened to key his car. She threatened to break a door handle off his home after he refused to let her inside. The picture that emerged from those recordings and messages was of a relationship where one person had decided that if she could not have him on her terms, there would be consequences. The text messages tell part of that story too. In a chain obtained by investigators, Shirilla wrote things like, "I'm gonna kill someone," and "I just want to bang my head on the wall till I'm dead." The emotional volatility in those messages is undeniable. But what prosecutors argued, and what the court ultimately accepted, is that volatility and intent are not mutually exclusive. A person can be genuinely unstable and still make a deliberate decision. The evidence was going to have to answer which of those things happened in the early morning hours of July 31st, 2022. The answer was already inside the car. Modern vehicles contain an event data recorder, commonly called a black box, that logs the precise mechanical inputs of the driver in the seconds before a collision: speed, throttle position, brake application, steering input. The EDR in Shirilla's Toyota Camry recorded everything that happened in those final seconds on that straight, empty street. The data showed that Shirilla had her right foot pressed to the acceleration pedal at its full extent. The service brake pedal was never applied before impact, not once. The vehicle had no mechanical defects that contributed to the crash. Nothing wrong with the brakes. Nothing wrong with the steering. The car did exactly what the driver told it to do, and the driver told it to go straight into that wall. This is the case ledger. If this is your first time here, we follow evidence. We don't protect powerful people. We don't move on until the case moves. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what comes next in this one. When police arrived at the scene, roughly 45 minutes after the crash, they found the Camry with severe damage and full airbag deployment. Dominic and Davion were unconscious, not breathing, and trapped inside. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. Shirilla was transported to a local hospital. She had survived. On her person, investigators found psilocybin mushrooms and a digital scale. She was arrested 3 months later on November 4, 2022. The body cam footage from that arrest, released publicly years later, showed something that investigators and commentators described as striking. Shirilla was handcuffed and tearful in the back of a police vehicle when an officer approached and asked her to step out. The officer identified herself as the investigator on the crash case. She told Shirilla directly that she was under arrest for aggravated murder ×2. What followed in that footage, the specific quality of Shirilla's reaction, the way she responded to the language being used, was analyzed and discussed extensively in the months and years after it was released. Former investigators who reviewed the footage used a phrase that came up repeatedly in coverage of the case. They called it a shocking lack of remorse, not grief, not horror, something they described as operating on a different frequency entirely from what they expected to see in that moment. Because she was 17 at the time of the crash, the decision of whether to try her as an adult was itself a legal question. The court decided she would be tried as an adult. The charges were significant: 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, and 1 count of possessing criminal tools. 12 counts in total. Shirilla opted for a bench trial, no jury. The case would be decided by a single judge, Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Judge Nancy Margaret Russo. The trial ran for 4 days. Prosecutors laid out their case methodically: the EDR data, the surveillance footage, the prior threats, the phone call 2 weeks before the crash where Shirilla said she would crash the car with Dominic in it, the pattern of behavior in the months leading up to July 31st, the testimony from Dominic's mother about what she had watched the relationship become. The defense argued that the crash was not intentional, that the relationship, while troubled, did not establish a clear motive for murder, that it could not be determined with certainty that Shirilla had meant to do what the evidence suggested she had done. They pointed to her age. They pointed to the emotional volatility documented in her own messages, the self-destructive language, the mental health struggles, the impulsivity. The defense asked the judge to see a teenager in crisis rather than a person who had made a calculated decision. Judge Russo looked at the same evidence and came to a different conclusion. On August 14, 2023, before she read the verdict, Judge Russo spoke. She did not begin with the legal findings. She began with what she had concluded about the human being standing in front of her. She described the surveillance footage and what it showed about the driver's intent. She walked through the prior threats, the pattern of behavior, the phone call 2 weeks before the crash. She described what the EDR data confirmed. And then she gave the case a frame that cut through every argument the defense had made about uncertainty and accident and the chaos of a troubled relationship. She said Shirilla had a mission that day, that she executed it with precision. She said the crash video clearly showed the purpose and intent of the defendant. She described Shirilla's history behind the wheel as making her a literal hell on wheels. And then she said the words that would be replayed and quoted for months afterward. She chose a course of death and destruction that day, and the mission was death. Guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Shirilla sobbed in the courtroom. The cameras captured it. Both families were present. The footage of that moment, Shirilla's reaction, the faces in the gallery, the stillness that followed the word guilty, spread across social media within hours. Judge Russo's language was striking in its clarity and its force. She did not hedge. She did not soften. She laid out what she believed the evidence showed, and she named it plainly. The mission was death. A week later, on August 21, 2023, Shirilla was sentenced. Before the judge announced her fate, Shirilla read a prepared statement. She said she was deeply sorry to the families of Dominic and Davion. She said she hoped they could one day see that she would never let this happen or do it on purpose. She said she wished she could remember what happened. She said she loved Dominic. She said he was her soulmate. Those words, delivered in that courtroom after that verdict, landed differently depending on who was listening. For the families of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan, the statement was not an accounting. It was another performance. Dominic's mother had sat through a trial in which the evidence of what had been done to her son was laid out in detail. The EDR data, the surveillance footage, the texts, the prior threats. She had listened to prosecutors describe a relationship that had been building towards something terrible for months. And now she was listening to the person who had ended her son's life say she could not remember. Dominic's sister, Christine, speaking publicly in 2026 after a Netflix documentary about the case brought renewed attention to it, was direct. She said Shirilla was rotten to the core. She said the documentary did not capture what the family had been through. She said watching her brother's memory be filtered through a screen and discussed at a distance was its own kind of ongoing loss. Judge Russo sentenced Mackenzie Shirilla to 2 concurrent sentences of 15 years to life. She is currently serving those sentences at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. Her earliest possible parole date is listed as October 2037. She will be approximately 33 years old. The case did not end with the sentencing. In 2024, Shirilla's legal team filed an appeal. The 8th District Court of Appeals reviewed the conviction and found no merit in the appeal. It was upheld in September 2024. The legal team then filed with the Ohio Supreme Court. In April 2025, the Ohio Supreme Court declined to hear the case. In March 2026, the 8th District Court of Appeals upheld the trial court's decision to deny Shirilla's post-conviction petition, ruling that it had been submitted one day past the 365-day jurisdictional deadline. One day, every door that Shirilla's legal team tried to open closed. Each appellate review returned to the same foundation: the EDR data, the surveillance footage, the pattern of behavior, and the judge's finding that the evidence established intent. The conviction has held at every level at which it has been challenged. In April 2026, a new petition was filed. Shirilla's new defense team submitted a supplemental post-conviction relief petition alleging that her original trial attorney had failed to present critical medical evidence that could have changed the outcome of the case. The petition argued that there was undisclosed information about Shirilla's mental and physical state that a competent defense would have put before the judge. That argument, ineffective assistance of counsel, is one of the narrower grounds on which a conviction can be challenged after all direct appeals have been exhausted. Whether that petition succeeds or not, the core of what the evidence showed on July 31, 2022 has been reviewed and affirmed multiple times by multiple courts. There are no skid marks. The brake pedal was never touched. The black box does not speculate. It does not remember things differently under stress. It does not have reasons for what it records. It recorded a driver with her foot on the accelerator at full extent, moving toward a brick wall, making no input that would suggest an attempt to stop. Courts have now looked at that data alongside everything else: the texts, the prior threats, the phone call 2 weeks before, the surveillance footage of the impact, and arrived at the same conclusion more than once. Davion Flanagan was 19 years old. He had gotten into that car without knowing what he was getting into. He was Dominic's friend. He had no part in whatever was happening between Shirilla and Russo. He was not the target of anything. He was simply there, in the wrong seat, in the wrong car, on the wrong morning. His family, like the Russo family, has had to carry the weight of that morning ever since. His family received no different outcome from that fact. The law does not distinguish in a case like this between the person someone intended to harm and the person who was present when the harm was carried out. Davion Flanagan was 19 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. And he was gone because of where he was sitting when someone else made a decision that had nothing to do with him. Dominic Russo was 20. He had been in a relationship that his own family watched deteriorate from the outside, watching warning signs accumulate without fully understanding what they were adding up to. 2 weeks before July 31st, he had gotten out of a car when the same threat was made and the same person was behind the wheel. He had called his mother. A friend had come to get him. On July 31st, he was in the car. The Netflix documentary, The Crash, released in May 2026, brought the case back into public view. It included what was described as Shirilla's first on-camera interview about what happened that morning. The documentary gave her a platform she had not previously had, a chance to tell her version of events directly to an audience of millions. It generated significant discussion online and in the media about the relationship, about the verdict, about what the footage and the evidence actually showed and what it meant. Some viewers came away with questions about whether the full picture had been presented at trial. Others came away exactly where the courts had arrived. The evidence, they said, had not changed. The black box had not changed. The wall on that empty street in Strongsville had not changed. Christine Russo, Dominic's sister, watched the attention the documentary generated and spoke to reporters about what it felt like to see her brother's death become the subject of a streaming series watched by millions. She said the family had never stopped living with what happened on July 31st, 2022. She said some things do not go away when the credits roll. Mackenzie Shirilla is currently 21 years old. She will be in the Ohio Reformatory for Women for at minimum another decade before any parole consideration is possible. Her attorneys are pursuing whatever legal avenues remain available. The courts have not yet finished with every motion that has been filed, but each one so far has returned to the same place. But the black box finished its work a long time ago. It recorded what happened in those final seconds. It did not record hesitation. It did not record a foot moving toward the brake. It recorded a driver and a decision and a wall. And it has not changed its answer since July 31st, 2022.